The Road to Rediscovery is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let me ask you something. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? For me growing up, feelings of anxiety, inadequacy, doubt, and even imposter syndrome got in the way of me reaching my goals and reaching my full potential, right? So, BetterHelp addresses these and more. It's not a crisis line and it's not self help, it's professional therapy done securely online. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions so you won't have to ever sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. It's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and get this, financial aid is even available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. They mean it. Visit betterhelp.com/road to rediscovery. That's better, H-E-L-P, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. And there's a special offer for our Road to Rediscovery listeners. Get 10% off your first month when you register at betterhelp.com/road to rediscovery. We're all on this journey of life together, and it sure feels good to know professional help is within our reach with BetterHelp. Again, that's better, H-E-L-P. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the Road to Rediscovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on the lessons that life throws at us to learn and grow, and of course, pay it forward, take it to the next level, and help others who are struggling through dark times. Now, as you know, on the Road to Rediscovery, we are passionate about delivering to you quality content that is of value to you and your personal growth. If you like what you hear, please visit roadtorediscovery.com/donate. That's road, the number 2, rediscovery.com/donate. We'll even give you a shout out in a future episode. And as always, there is no obligation. We are truly, truly grateful for your listenership. Now, many of you know, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this show's 4 cornerstones to personal growth. Well, today we're going to focus on cornerstone number 4, which is service to others. This one is hugely important, as I truly believe in my heart of hearts, service to others is literally the foundation and recipe for changing the world. Just think about the exponential effect from each person doing just a small part. Of course, service to others must also be fueled by love, compassion, thoughtfulness, and the desire and passion for human interaction. Well, my special guest is all these things and more. She describes herself as an archaeologist of people by supporting others and discovering the treasure inside of them. Born and raised in South Texas, she's a Harvard graduate, having studied global health, human suffering, and more. Her passion for helping others has taken her all over the world, including childbirth research in Tanzania, domestic violence and girls' empowerment in Mauritius, and youth empowerment and environmental conservation in the Amazon jungle, tuberculosis and health epidemics in Peru, and a lot more. She is also the co-founder of She Is the Universe, building a global scale community of empowerment and authentic relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Sara Surani to the show. Hey, Sara, it's so great to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Man, it's so great to have you. Thank you. Thank you. I know you're busy and you have a lot of stuff going on, so we're really grateful for you taking time out of your busy schedule to share some insight and share your journey with the listeners. So thank you. So in reflecting from your earliest age, can you share, like, how did your fascination with people in different cultures begin?
Yeah, so I think I've been thinking about this question because a friend asked me this question a couple weeks ago, and a a question that came in mind to answer this question
Mhm.
was actually who was I before I was me, right? And I
Ooh.
I think I've been thinking about that a lot. This whole who was I before I was me, as I've been thinking a lot about my ancestry and my grandmother and her
Mhm.
stories.
Mhm.
And I always think that, I mean, it's so because when you first asked me that question, right, about when did this begin or when did this love for people start,
Right.
there wasn't like, sometimes you have those moments where a story comes to mind.
Mhm.
And for me, I don't have one. I think that from my earliest memories, that was always the case. And I think it comes from like when I think about this being a child, I remember like things like when I was very young, like probably 3 or 4 years old,
Mhm.
my parents who had immigrated to the US, and they eventually became US citizens, would often like there were other people in our community who weren't citizens, and they would often stay in our houses sometimes when there were different raids going on. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that was going on. Obviously, I was three, probably three, because I
Right.
was thinking, of what house was it? No, we were three. I was three,
Yeah.
but that was there from a young age of my
Mhm.
parents supporting others. But when I
Mhm.
think back even more, I think about like as I gotten to know my grandmother more, she's very much the kind of person who, like, it doesn't matter if you're her grandkid or not, she will
Mhm.
feed you, and you will
Mhm.
have to eat, or
Yes.
it'll be almost rude, right? So, like,
Yes.
and even before then, I hear stories about how her parents in their village in India, they were when a lot of travelers would go through their village.
Mhm.
And I never knew my great grandparents, but I would hear stories about how they would cook. My great grandmother would cook for people in the community. So I think when
Mm.
it comes to like, we talk about how there are different traits that are passed down, right? Like maybe
Yeah.
my hair was passed down from like this grandmother or that grandmother, but
Right.
also I think the same goes for these traits about service and loving people.
Mhm.
So I think that, right? Some
Yeah.
things are we hear intergenerational trauma, right? But there's also this 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 intergenerational love for people, right? And a
Yeah.
culture that really cares and values people and serving other people.
Gotcha. There's something to be said about that intergenerational love,
Mhm.
especially when you're young and you're growing up. I mean, in some cases, depending on the environment that a youth is in, um, it kind of organically starts to develop within the youth to have this love and appreciation for generations like their mother, their grandmother, their great grandmother, and so forth, because of the community, right? And then in some cases, I guess it may not develop in some youth, and so I wonder what causes the development of that appreciation, such as what you have, uh, to develop in a youth versus a youth that it doesn't develop in? Is it the condition of the environment, or the culture? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's such a big question. I mean, I think conditioning always plays a big role in it, and
Hmm.
conditioning and how people grow up influences your behaviors and how you see the world.
Yeah.
And of course, cultures, there's a difference between like high touch cultures and low touch cultures, as well
Hmm.
as cultures that are more collective,
Hmm.
and more cultures that are focused on the individual, right? And
Yeah.
even within that, there comes a need, right? So some
Hmm.
cultures, like, there's a reason there's like in a village where everyone has different roles, like where there is this level of codependency, of course, there's more of a collective, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, my friend Jeff, who introduced us.
Yeah.
And so we've been talking a lot about this love that speaks in we,
Hmm.
right? And of course,
Hmm.
not a romantic love. Like,
Right.
I think when I think of the love that speaks in we think of it more as like this revolutionary love that focuses on the collective more than the individual. And
Yes.
we were talking a lot about this. Like I grew up in a Pakistani Indian culture. My friend grew up
Hmm.
in a Filipino culture, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they're very collective cultures. So naturally, like when you eat together, you eat, there's a lot of food and people, you eat family style, right? When
Right.
you
Right.
when you visit your family, there's a ton of family, right? And you don't
Hmm.
even know who someone is, and you still call them aunt and uncle.
That's
And
right.
so, yeah, it's great. It's like it's
Uh-huh.
very collective, like,
Uh-huh.
and when you dream, you don't dream in I, you dream in we. And we were kind of
Mm.
talking about how, of course, this culture influenced my conditioning, and that
Hmm.
conditioning influences my way of seeing this.
Hmm.
But is there a way to think about this collective we and then this love, which is directly related to service, right? Because if you think of
Hmm.
this collective love in the context of service, if you can look at someone and see no stranger and look at someone and see them as like your friend or your brother or your cousin, then like
Right.
it's not, it's like service isn't like, wow, like you're
It's,
serving others. It's like,
yeah.
obviously I would do this.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it's not perceived as a chore.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. I'm here
Yeah.
at this break. It's like, it's
Yeah.
like you can do it every day, all the time. But
I got you.
hmm
Yeah. So it's given freely of yourself. It's having empathy for your fellow human, and like you said, um, considering them like a cousin or an uncle or a friend, even though they're a complete stranger, and just from a humanitarian standpoint, and having that heart for service, you're just compelled to serve, and it doesn't feel like a chore in the least bit. Is that right?
right. Even like one quote that I heard, like that really impacted me. I had a mentor tell me this, like
Hmm.
2015, I think. And I honestly think I heard this quote, it blew my mind, but I didn't
Hmm.
realize it blew my mind until like 2 years later.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the quote was by Leela Watson. And she said, if you have come to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if you
Mm.
have come because your liberation is bound in mine, then let us work together.
Liberation bound in mind. Let's
Yeah,
work
yeah.
together. That's pretty deep. That makes a lot of sense, though. And just the face value of coming to help me. It sounds genuine, authentic. Yeah, I'm coming to help, but um, but the the alternative, what she offered, is that's the truest meaning, and then you
Yeah.
help each other and work together towards helping you. That's the we you're talking about, right?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. That's the we, like it's
Yeah.
not, if you have come, if it's the whole, like the contrast, right? Like if
Yeah.
you have come to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if
Yes.
you have come because your liberation is bound in mine, like our liberation is bound together,
Right.
then let's work together, right?
Yes.
And this
Yes.
whole idea, like it's so powerful and it's used a lot in community mobilizing and community health and
Hmm.
community education and in these fields. But
Hmm.
you see it because in these forms, it's not like you're not doing something to feel good about yourself. Chances
No.
are that like it's hard. It's like, how can, and I see this and I see the struggle of this in friends of mine who work in this field,
Okay.
who are fighting for issues that they feel deeply, even
Right.
though they may have the privilege to not be impacted by it as deeply.
Hmm.
And it's hard, because it's like, how can I can eat, but how
Yeah.
can I feel full
Right.
when my friends or siblings or cousins or people I don't know and still relate with are hungry, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
So no matter how much I eat, I won't get full. And it's like, for me, I'm like, wow, that's so powerful to hear that. And even more powerful to experience this bound liberation, right?
Yeah.
Um, or the
Yeah.
same with like how can I be, like when there are kids, like with everything going on in the world, like how can I sleep when there are people around the world who don't have a home? Or
Right.
how can I like not be worried about this when
Hmm.
there are kids across the
Hmm.
border who are being held in cells, right? So it's
Yeah.
these issues being like my liberation is bound in that, even if I do not know this person personally.
Oh, I see. Yes, that is very powerful, you know, and it can move a person when you really take that to heart, right? Bound in my liberation, and then slowly that we starts to develop because when you're bound in liberation, if I'm hearing you correctly, when you're bound in liberation with someone, then whatever dilemma or whatever challenge becomes, not I have this challenge, but we have this challenge.
Exactly.
It's not my challenge, it's our challenge.
Hmm.
And then we work together. And what two people working together has a more tremendous impact than just one.
Yeah. And
I
you're not
got you.
alone, you know? Like it's very lonely. I
That's
mean,
right.
everyone experiences loneliness and feeling alone, you know? Like
Yes,
all you really need is for someone to be like, "Oh, you're not alone. We're in this together." Like,
that's right.
you know,
That,
yes, you have this thing and I don't know what this might feel like that you're
yeah.
going through, but
Hmm.
even though you're going through this alone, even though you're experiencing this situation alone, we're in this together. And that comes back to our liberation, right? And this love
Yeah.
that speaks in we.
No, it does. It does tremendously. And so I wanted to touch on that briefly. Um, like you mentioned in one of your scenarios, or true scenarios, you have friends that are very passionate about a cause, and they advocate for that, but they may be in a privileged state to where they're not as impacted, and so um, you know uh, how does one become bound in that liberation without self-deprecating because they're privileged, or self-deprecating because um, they they have three squares a day, they have a roof over their heads, they have clothes on their back, or they're not subject to or to be a victim of violence because of where they come from. I mean, how does one be passionate and stand alongside like an ally, okay, with others for that cause, but not beat themselves up or guilt themselves because they're of a particular socioeconomic different place.
Right, right. And I think like this is such an important question. I think like one way to think about it, like one way to visualize it is
Hmm.
like saying there are so many people who have, who that don't have access to food, or there's like a lot of food insecurity, right?
Right.
But say I have a buffet of food, right,
Hmm.
at home,
Hmm.
right? And I'm like, oh my God, there are so many people who don't have access to food. Like, that's so terrible. Maybe I shouldn't eat because I feel bad that I have access to this food, right? Or
Hmm.
what should I do? I have this buffet of food in front of me and I don't know what to do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, I think that, right? If you have this buffet and food in front of you, there are two things to do. The first, first of all, eat it, because if you
Yeah,
don't eat the food, you're not going to have the energy to do anything else if you're sitting there, right?
that's right.
The second thing is talk to people.
Yeah.
Like, step outside of your house
Hmm.
and talk to people. And don't
Hmm.
talk to people as someone who's like trying to help someone. Talk to people as someone who's trying to understand someone and see
Yes.
where they're coming from and see what, not just how you can help them, but connect to this bound liberation of like, how can we support each other? Right?
Hmm.
How can we,
Hmm.
like not fix the system, that's a big thing, but fix the system in little ways, right? And then
Yes,
the third thing is you have this access to this buffet, share it,
that's
you
right.
know,
That's right.
invite people over to the table to
Yes.
share it. So
Yes.
if you have access to these resources,
Hmm.
if you have, I have a friend who actually uses an example called
Hmm.
the Trojan horse, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
he he's a community organizer and he goes to Harvard Law School, and he's always like frustrated. He's like, wow, there's so much privilege. There's so much privilege. He's
Hmm.
a white man.
Hmm.
And he's like, I think of it as a Trojan horse, right? How can I get to these spaces so I can let other people in? And I
Oh.
I love that, because if you
Yeah,
have access to these spaces, if you have access to these, political seats at the table, you have access to this buffet of food, metaphorically or literally,
right,
like, don't, like, go on a, don't starve yourself. Like,
right.
eat so you have the energy, get educated so you have the resources, like,
Yes,
run for politics if you have a good heart and people are going to vote for you and you have that privilege to be able and resources to do that,
right, right.
then bring other people to the table.
Hmm.
And in order to bring other people to the table, to make sure you're not bringing the same people who are reiterating these problems, like,
Right.
go and listen to people, and not as someone who's like, I'm trying to get these stories to help my campaign. Like, go and talk to people as friends, like,
Hmm.
without an agenda, because
Right.
you care about them and you're trying to, because you see a part of yourself in them and recognize the fact that in one way or another, you were born lucky, that you were born lucky to have, like, to be in a space or to a family who has, the privilege to support you, or you were born lucky to have citizenship somewhere, or you were born lucky to be born in a certain zip code and have access to, public resources. And know that if in another world, in another life, like, you could have been in the same place in the same situation,
Hmm.
and some part of that was luck. And looking at someone and being like, yeah, dude, like, I would, like, you know, like,
Yeah.
be that approach to something, because people can feel it. People can always feel it. Maya Angelou's like,
Hmm.
people will forget what you. I always mix this up. People will forget what you said and what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
100%.
Yeah, like, be
Yep.
a human, talk to people, understand where they're
Yes.
coming from, and then be a Trojan horse if you need to. Like, share your buffet, like, give,
Yeah.
bring more plates out, like, learn
Right.
how to cook food. So it's not
Yes.
just you're depending on the buffet to give other people, but you're learning how to cook food so you can continuously, if you have access to the kitchen, cook the food for the people, like,
Hmm.
teach people how to cook food. So that way,
Yes.
so it's like all this, there's so much people can do,
Hmm.
especially if you have the privilege to do it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And so, what I'm hearing here is, um, seek not to be heard, but to understand. As well as, instead of depriving yourself because you feel guilty that there are others who are going without, to quote eat your food, right? And leverage that platform, leverage that privilege, in such a way that can help others. The Trojan horse metaphor is genius. It's brilliant, and I really appreciate you sharing that with me, Sarah, because I can. It gives a vivid picture of of what that means for someone of privilege, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and so, just hearing how your colleague has developed that and uses that, that's a great way to just remove the guilt, because you're you're using that privilege to be an agent of change, right? and
Yeah.
and help others.
Exactly, and his
Yeah,
name's Sean, and he's incredible at this exactly, right? Recognizing his
yeah,
privilege
yeah,
and his space and using that platform to bring other people up. And I think that's like, I look at that and I'm like, oh, I see it working. Like, it's
yeah,
not just this Trojan horse, this like metaphor that's like, oh, okay, that sounds good in theory, but when he says that, he does it. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's amazing. Like, thank you
yeah.
for being an example.
Oh, nice. So it's put into action and it
Hmm.
gets results. Yeah, I mean, that's even better. Yeah. Shout out to Sean. Sean, right?
Sean, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great. Yeah, big shout out to Sean for the Trojan horse, model, I'll call it. I wanted to talk about just some of the different experiences you've had in your journey throughout the world, and in helping groups and so forth. Um, Now, this it, when you visit a country or a town or a city, you're visiting with purpose, right? And that
Right.
purpose is to serve. Um, Now, what you may be heading into, and I'm sure you'll share here, could be um, could land you in the midst of some very, very dark or despair or challenges or struggles that a community or a country is going through. Are we? Is that right so far?
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Okay. Okay. Great. So, in the countries where you experience tremendous suffering, I have to imagine that you have to play or not play, but be that beacon in the night, right? A positive light for people to give people hope, encouragement. Um, I wanted to know what keeps you focused on a serving heart, being that light of positivity and encouragement in the midst of such struggling circumstances.
Yeah, it's actually a really great question. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I think it's really challenging, and it's something I really struggle with.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's like it's this helplessness sometimes you feel, right? Like this
Right.
helplessness I struggle with, where I'm like, I
Hmm.
can't do anything. And as
Yeah.
someone who sometimes likes to have control or like is used to, it's like
Hmm.
these sometimes contexts that you work in when you're working in public health or public education, like you don't have any control and you feel very helpless, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's like showing up using this Trojan horse metaphor. It's like showing up with the horse, but there's nothing inside it. It's like full of confetti, like
Confetti.
there's nothing.
I
There's like
see.
nothing to give, nothing to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what keeps me going is what keeps everyone else going. And I think
Understood.
that stories in each other.
Yes.
And it also makes this, with my friends, I use this word called a bleeding heart.
Yeah.
And it's like when your heart, it hurts so much and you care so much that it bleeds. And it's
Yeah.
so wonderful because it's so beautiful to feel and
Hmm.
care so much about
Hmm.
people or something or someone or someplace. But it hurts physically to
Yeah.
to care so much about people or a community or a cause and not being able to do anything about it sometimes.
Hmm.
And I remember there was a night for a while I was living in the Amazon jungle in Peru, in northern Peru,
Hmm.
and was working around remote communities, right? And they're
Yes.
rural communities, and they were a little out. They were like some were closer to the nearest town, but some
Hmm.
were further away. Like you had to, from the capital of Peru, Lima, you had to take a 2.5 hour flight, then a 3 hour bus,
Wow.
and then take a 30-minute rickshaw, like a
Y-
moto. And
Right.
then this specific community was a 7 hour canoe ride.
Mm.
Okay. So very
7 hours.
far, right? seven
Yeah.
hours, right? Very
Yeah.
far on a canoe, small canoe with like
Yeah. Yeah.
six
That's a
people.
long time in a
Long
canoe.
time, right? And
Hmm.
so in this community, I think it's called Dos de Mayo, it was away from the public system, right? So with schools, when it was raining, which was like you're in the rainforest, so
Yeah.
there were sometimes they'd have teachers come from the town, which was like 7 hours away.
Right.
But generally, there was not much access to public education.
Hmm.
And when it came to healthcare, one night, I remember I was working with this organization called Minga Peru, and
Hmm.
was staying with community health workers. So I would stay in the houses of different like health promoters who were there.
Gotcha.
I was staying with a health promoter, and they would kind of like introduce me, and I was doing focus groups and different things and working with this other coworker I had. And she, one night, like I had, like during this time, I was like, okay, I'm not going to have any fears. But every night, like the one like spiral that would go into my head is like, what if I get bit by a snake, right? Like, what if there's
Yeah.
a viper and there's
Right.
a snake? So in the closer communities, I'd mentally rationalize and be like, okay, 3 hour canoe ride to the nearest hospital. I'm good, right?
Oh
Take me
my
to town.
gosh.
But this community, I was like, oh my God, I'm 7 hours away canoe ride. And then 3 hours away, I'm 10 hours away. And like 100%, not even 10 hours, sorry, 7 hours upstream,
Yeah.
9 hours downstream. So
Oh my
9 hour
gosh.
race, canoe ride, right? So I
Yeah.
was like, if I get bit by a snake, I'm going to die.
Oh
Like, there's
Lord.
no like,
Oh my
There's
gosh.
that's it, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember, like, this is in my head, right? And so I was
Uh-huh.
curious, and I was, like, talking to the health promoter, and I was like, "Signora Francesca, like, what do you do when people get what do you do when people get sick?" Because the other communities I were in were 2 to 3 hours away, so it's a little closer.
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, here when you get sick, we can't get sick because when we get sick, we die
Oh gosh.
because there's no, I mean, access to, like, sick in a way that it's non-preventable. There's a lot of
Yeah.
traditional medicine that, like, people use, and that's like that really works. But she was
Right.
talking about in this, like, in this context, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And so, like, in the context I was asking her,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "It's really interesting
Mm-hmm.
because here, all these things, right? People live in the city, people live in the capital, people live in these urban areas, and they have their jewelry and their fancy cars,
Right.
and it's so silly because, like, when they die, it's all useless, right? Like this fancy
Yes.
ring and everything.
Yes.
But the sad thing is that our life, the government thinks that our life is worth, she said, 10 centimos. And centimos is like the equivalent of, like, centimos is like the metaphorical equivalent of a dime, right?
Oh my.
And she
Yeah.
said 10 centimos is like less than nothing. Because when you have someone on the streets giving you money and all you have is 10 cents, you're not going
Yeah.
to give this person 10 cents. You
Right.
don't give him anything, because
No.
giving that person nothing is better than giving them 10 cents and taking away dignity by being like, this is what something is worth, right? And
Yeah.
she's like,
Yeah.
this is interesting because you think that all lives are equal,
Mm-hmm.
but in the moments that, like, if I get sick, right? Like if I have a pulmonary embolism, or
Oh
in
gosh.
the communities, there's a lot of, like, at the time cervical cancer is very big. So
Yeah.
if you get cervical cancer or pulmonary embolism
Mm-hmm.
and you go to a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
like, they will do what they can to fix that, right? But if you
Right.
don't have access to the hospital, you don't have a chance. So, like,
Mm.
who decides how valuable someone's life is? Like,
Right.
you can
Right.
think your life is valuable, but then, like, how does society think? What does government think, right? And it broke my heart, like, this
Mm.
whole idea about, like, what happens when healthcare isn't able to reach certain areas, and that
Right.
really affects, like, in these communities that are both are remote but not entirely remote, right? Because
Right. Right.
everyone's still speaking Spanish, but it's fascinating, and it broke my heart, and I still think about that. But I also use that fire to fuel me because it makes me angry, and I think anger is this it comes from this helplessness, and people think of anger as a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, contextually, right? But I
Yeah.
think anger can be so powerful because it's this same anger that doesn't make me complacent. And this
Yes.
same anger that I'm like, no, like, that's like, in the context of this story, I'm like, no, like, this is a good healthcare plan, but what about people here? What about people
Yes.
you're not including?
Yep.
Like, I can't speak, I don't know what that's like. My dad's a doctor. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
have access to healthcare. Like, it's like, I
Right.
don't know what that's like for a
No.
system to value my life 10 centimos, like one dime. Like, I don't know what that's like. But people know what that's like. And
Yeah.
let's talk to people and bring those people and write down those stories or
Mm-hmm.
record those stories
Mm-hmm.
and listen to them, and have people making these decisions listen to these stories and incorporate in them. And I think that bound liberation, there's definite anger involved in that.
Oh
And I
sure.
think that comes from helplessness, but not a tough anger, like this tender
No.
anger, right? That also comes
Right.
from love.
No, for sure. Yeah. It's not the malicious anger where you want to do harm.
No,
Right.
no.
It's an anger of passion because you see something that is not right based on your principles, based on your upbringing, based on what you know is right or wrong. You see something that is not right, and you feel helpless because what can you do about it? It's easy to feel overwhelmed, and when you're not quite sure what to do about it, or say one person is too small to make a change, but collectively people can, but no one seems to be coming to the table, then the next feeling I would imagine would be anger. And
Yeah.
then that anger would, to your point, cause you not to be complacent and to take action to encourage others to join you as a team to help, help foster change so that there is adequate healthcare and medical attention for these remote places, for instance, in this context, right?
Right. And even like actually, even a better way, sometimes I need to work on my emotional vocabulary because I use the word anger a lot. But I think another way to phrase it would even be like a fierce love
Yes, there
or a
we go.
fierce care. Because I think
Yes,
I do also mean anger, but I think anger has different connotations associated with it.
it
That it's,
does.
yeah,
Yeah.
but this fierce love, right? This
Hmm.
fierce love that I care about this so much that I'm willing to speak up for it,
Yes.
right? This
Yes.
for like this, like, like you have this like this tender heart, but in a lion, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it's just like as a parent, right? And you
Mhm.
come to the defense of your child, or like you come to the defense of your partner, and defend their honor, and it's out of the love for that person, right? So that's the fierce love, that at least I'm perceiving as you're mentioning this.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. Fierce love.
Yeah, fierce love. I
Mhm.
love that too. I really do. Wow. So, uh, wanted to know, you know, there's many different villages and countries, and there's all over the world, and you've been to many places, and there are different cultures, obviously, but there are things that are universal when it comes to bringing people together,
Mhm.
and some of these are obvious, like food. When people cook and you ask someone to join or sit and eat with me, that is a connection, that is an offer to connect, right?
Right,
Same
right.
same for music and dance, right? It's an artistic expression, and it's something that you ask others to join you with or in. So I wanted to know, are there any other universal type of connections or activities that you've seen in your travels that has been commonplace in the places you've been?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question too. I think stories, right?
Stories, yes, thank
Stories.
you. Yes, yes.
I think it's like stories that connects people more than anything, and it's so interesting because stories have been there since like we first like fire, right?
Yes.
Like when people would light fires to keep warm, what do?
Hmm.
You get around the fire to stay warm
Hmm.
and you tell stories, right?
Yeah.
And it's this same thing that manifests in different ways, right? And so
Hmm.
like I think about this and like my when my cousin was getting married, he had this like Pakistani wedding, and
Hmm.
there's like a day dedicated to singing, sitting in a circle and singing. And it's
Nice.
very much led by all of the grandmothers, right? Like they just
Yeah.
totally, this is their day. Indian weddings are not even about the bride and groom, they're just about the colors, the food, and the grandmothers.
Oh.
And they they sit in a circle and they sing and they
Hmm.
also tell stories. And
Hmm.
they're stories that I've never, and it only happens in these special moments, right? But it's like you see this happen there, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
see this happen in stories like I'm sitting with a friend in Boston, we're sharing stories, or I'm sitting with a like someone who's now my like my aunt or my grandmother in the Dominican Republic, and she's telling me, sitting and telling me stories about her
Wow.
granddaughter and her
Yeah.
son.
Yeah.
And it's this magical way of connecting people,
Hmm.
but it's that not only connects people and brings people together, but it's like we forget how much we love them, you know?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
some of us have had like my fondest memories as a kid where I was lucky to have my parents read bedtime stories to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
remember how much I loved that. Or I know how
Mm-hmm.
much I love reading stories to my niece. But
Yeah.
I look forward to whenever I see my friends, because sometimes it goes a long time before I see them again,
Right.
listening to their stories, right?
Mm.
And it's this, and that also brings us empathy, right? Like
Yes, it
my
does.
friend sharing a story with me just earlier today, he was telling me a story about like his students and like how this funny conversation that happened, and he's a teacher, and how that's sometimes hard in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so beautiful because I hadn't seen this friend in a while, but him sharing about this conversation he had with the student made me feel so much warmth for him. It made me understand him a little bit more through his
Mm-hmm.
interactions with other people, right?
Yes.
And it's these stories that bring us together, but it's these stories that also make us feel less lonely, because that's also universal, right? Like
Yes.
it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, what you have or what you don't have, you do have some suffering. Like
Oh,
everyone's
yeah.
suffering
That's
one thing
right.
or another.
That's right.
Like, and being able to express that, or to see stories, sure, to hear stories, it makes you feel more connected to the other
Yes.
person and feel more heard and feel more seen, which is also something universal. Like it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from or what you're doing or anything.
Mm-hmm.
As a human, you have this desire to feel seen, heard, and valued, or seen, heard, and accepted, or seen, heard, and understood.
Right.
And one of the ways that we've evolved and currently keep evolving to feel a little bit more seen and heard is through stories and storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so storytelling, it does connect, and it is universal.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah, because uh, a, a friend or a colleague you haven't seen in years, and you see them now, you're having a cup of coffee, they're telling you a story, or even you're on the phone and they're telling you a story, they're pulling you in to their world, and they're taking you on a journey of, this story, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that way you don't feel alone, you don't feel isolated, I guess, is the case. You're not isolated.
Yeah, and it's like it's the same thing as like sometimes for comfort we turn to books or movies or TV shows.
Sure,
And
sure.
some of the reasons, especially for me, I love Harry Potter. And
Mhm.
one of my comfort things is like when I move to a new place and it's challenging, I read the Harry Potter books again and I find it very
Mhm.
soothing, right? And
Yeah.
part of the reason is because I love going into someone else's world.
Yes.
And when you hear someone's story, like when someone's really telling you a story, like let
Mhm.
me tell you about this
Mhm.
tradition my mother and I have, or let me tell you about like what it was like growing up in New Jersey. Like you're for a minute you transcend time and space, and if you're really listening to the person's story, you're in that person's world for a little bit.
Oh, you certainly are. I mean, and I don't know. I've been told ever since I was a kid that I daydream and imagine a lot, and I never thought I did, but I guess I have. Multiple people have told me, but I say that to say that whenever I am with a friend and they're sharing a story, it's almost like through my mind's eye that I am actually visualizing what they are describing. I'm in the place that they are talking about. And whatever the situation is, I feel whatever that circumstance would bring, whether it's fear or anxiety or happiness or joy. So I can see that in my mind's eye
Yeah.
and actually visualize as they're telling the story. And it really makes me feel connected.
And it's this sacred thing too. I have two friends that I was recently with, and it was magical. We were sitting in a little park, and it was so
Yeah.
beautiful because one of them I had never seen before.
Mhm.
Sorry, I had never met in person. She was someone I
Okay.
interacted with on Zoom.
Mhm.
And the other one, I had met her in a coffee shop in Korea like years ago.
Mhm.
So reconnecting, and three of us had never been in the same space before. And we're sitting in a park and we're telling stories. Like, I want to get to know you better. Tell me a story.
Right, right.
But the way that we naturally evolved, we were sitting in this park, the three of us, and we would close our eyes and one person would tell a story.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we would really imagine what that person was going through and ask questions like, oh, wait, what color was this? You know, what was
Right.
around you? What kind of tree? Was it a mango tree? And I had never felt closer to
Mhm.
someone,
Mm.
right? Like
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
listening to her stories. And it was like like and it was like time in those moments. I don't know how much, I don't even know how long it was, right? Maybe it was
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 hours we were just sitting there in
Yeah.
this park, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
listening and sharing stories. And it's one of those things that sounds so simple, right? You can find a park, you can go sit with anyone, but the part of it's just doing it, because it's not something unreachable or inaccessible that you need something to do.
Right,
You don't
right.
even need to know someone, you know, like
Right.
I hadn't even I it was the first time I met one of the girls, and it
Yeah.
was like in magical. It was nothing short of magical.
Wow. Yeah. And that's a true connection, right? It's a
Hmm.
deep immersed experience. And like you said, you don't have to be doing anything at all. You were just say at a coffee shop or sitting in the park, and having that deep immersed experience. I love that, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That right there is a great example of a true connection without really doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So, can you share with the listeners a little bit about She is the Universe and how it started, the inspiration behind it, and its mission and purpose?
Yes, of course. So She's Universe was actually started by Laura Peña, who's the founder. It was initially this project to go all over the world interviewing 111 girls.
Hmm.
And then while on this project, Laura and I meet most people I know in coffee shops. Right? So
Yeah.
we met up, I met her in this coffee shop,
Uh-huh.
and she was telling me a bit about her project, and I got really interested. And but we reconnected. This was back in 2018. We reconnected 2020 in the pandemic.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I am an educator and I love education and see the power of community building through personal and professional development.
Yes.
And we started working together, just realizing how lonely we personally were feeling and how so many people around the world are also feeling this lonely,
Right.
but especially teenage girls, right? Get such a
Hmm.
sensitive age where girls between the age of 13 to 20 start losing their confidence. And so many girls around the world don't have access to, education, or don't
Right.
have access to community building spaces. So we started building these community, I call them girls, or girls from all over the world could come and just meet each other and talk about these topics that were on their mind with someone from halfway across the world to feel less alone.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so that's kind of when I hopped in, and we just started building this and building this and building this and finding different ways to support girls personally and professionally. And we believe that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So all our programming is always
Mm.
free for all girls, right?
Yeah.
Around 13 to 22 at this point.
Yes.
And it's called She is the Universe because we believe that, some people, you want to change the world, you want to change the universe, but sometimes if you can change one person's life,
Yeah.
that's like changing the universe, right?
Of course.
It's like, yeah, it's like there's this quote from Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I may be mixing those up, but there's this boy in that show, in the book, that asks his father, like, the world is so big, I'm so small, how can I make a difference?
Hmm.
And he says, even if you move one grain of sand in the Sahara Desert, you're still making a difference, right?
Yes.
So that's what we try to show is like, yes, there are girls who want to change the world in their communities, so many of them, right?
Right.
But also there are girls who want to change themselves and focus on improving themselves in their relationship with their parents or their friends. And with anything when you're learning, you're changing something. So she's the universe is focused on global girls empowerment. We're like a
Hmm.
movement. We now have
Hmm.
girls from over 50 countries. We have virtual programs for girls, as well as now we've been moving. We just last weekend had our first in-person retreat where we gathered girls from all over the Dominican Republic to come together and
Mm.
have a leadership retreat and empowerment program to talk about their dreams and talk about the change they want to see in the world, in the community, and in themselves. So we're working on that and building this in person as these in-person events become a little more accessible, but at the same time we're online as well, continuing the virtual programming because there's value in connecting with people from Singapore and Australia and Indiana and
Yeah.
Florida and Brazil at the same time.
Yes.
So that we focus on mentorship, community building, and
Hmm.
storytelling,
Hmm.
and to focus a lot on this R, right? How can we know that it's not just your dream or my dream, but we're
Right.
all working towards supporting each other's dreams together.
Yes. Yes. This is absolutely it's tremendous. It really is. She is the universe for girls empowerment all over the world, not just uplifting them individually, but helping them understand the true spirit behind uplifting others, right? And collectively as a
Yes.
group, just growing and realizing their potential, right?
Exactly. And like realizing their potential by at the same time supporting others realizing their potential. Because when you realize your potential, like when you
Hmm.
see someone realize their potential,
Hmm.
it's a very empowering feeling. Like when I see someone realize their potential, it makes me realize my potential.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
no doubt, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
would you even go as far as to say, Sarah, that someone can realize their potential as a result of the interaction with someone else?
Oh my God, absolutely. Like, I think that, I mean,
Awesome.
not even go as far to say, but I feel
Yeah.
like that's such, like, I think people are always surprised by when you want, say, you want to change the world,
Yeah.
that it has to mean like getting healthcare access to everyone everywhere, right?
Hmm.
That would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Of course.
at the same time, people don't realize the value in sharing with someone, but also listening to someone. And
Yes.
it's like, there is this quote from um, I think it's from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but
Okay.
it's about how um, having one person, all you need is one person to believe in you.
Yes.
Because sometimes when you're on your own, it's very lonely. But even
Hmm.
having one person believe in you can change everything. So, but literally change everything, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like
Yeah.
a big thing to go as far to say to be like, oh, can one person believe in you and change everything? It's like, no, like
Mm.
you need that. Like that's
Yeah.
the biggest thing you can do is genuinely actually believe in someone.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it has such a profound effect,
Mm-hmm.
that's long lasting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it truly does. So, Sarah, as we get close to wrapping up, one question I did have for you is: in all your travels, and all the
Mm-hmm.
people you've met, and all the different experiences that you've had in these places, what is the one primary thing throughout your journey that that has taught you the greatest lesson about life?
Oh, the greatest lesson about life. I think what comes to my mind
Hmm.
is going to all these different places and meeting all these different people and
Hmm.
having to learn different languages, right?
Hmm.
Try different foods, have different conversations, listening to same is these different stories, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, is that we're all more similar than different.
Mm.
We're all
I
more similar than different. And
I
at
feel that is very profound. It truly is, and it's thought provoking. So
yeah.
we're
And
all more similar than different.
we all at the end of the day want the same things. And
Yeah.
we all want to feel seen, we all want to feel heard, we all want to feel valued. And it doesn't matter who we are, it doesn't matter where we're from. And if we can understand that at the end of the day, we all want to go to sleep feeling the same way,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
that builds compassion. No one wants to go to sleep feeling lonely. Like,
No.
no, everyone wants to go to sleep feeling at peace and not
Yes.
feeling anxious. And knowing that that's a common feeling that everyone around the world has, it makes us feel a lot closer and a lot more similar than different.
And connected.
And connected, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we're small. Like, there are more than 7 billion people in this world. Like, yes, you're small, but you're also big, because if you believe in someone, you can change. It's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it is.
So it's
Yeah.
like, try to listen to someone.
Love it. Love it. For sure. So, Sarah, how can the listeners connect with you and learn more about your great work, and maybe even connect with She is the Universe?
Yes. Well, to connect with She is the Universe, you can go to sheistheuniverse.org.
Okay.
We have different opportunities. If you know someone who's a girl between 13 to 20, please tell her to sign up. We have a lot of events for free girls. We have a lot of free events for girls.
Sure.
We're also looking, if you're interested in supporting in any way, we would love support. We're a small organization, but we're also a movement, and we're growing, and we're trying to get more people involved. And to contact me, you can reach me on my email and my LinkedIn, which I will share with Aubrey to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Yes. And we will make sure that we have links to She is the Universe, your LinkedIn page, as well as your email address in the episode show notes, so people can contact you and learn about She is the Universe as they listen to this awesome episode. Awesome. Well, Sarah, it's been so great having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I'd love to catch up with you further later in the year for any updates with the organization or any new projects that you may be working on in the future.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to it. This has been a treat.
Oh, fantastic. Likewise. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Sarah. Thank you once again. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And look, if you have a loved one, a friend, a coworker, colleague who seems to be just at the end of their rope, going through dark days of despair, they seem as if they have nowhere to turn, no one to turn to. I humbly ask that you please share this show with them, because on the road to rediscovery, we want our listeners to know two things. Number one, you're not alone. And number two, there's always hope. The road to rediscovery, it's part of a movement, part of a revolution. And guess what? You are now part of it. We're all roadies on this journey of life, and it sure feels good having you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have. The Road to Rediscovery is an AJ Shark production.